From Left Side, Right Side Games, I'm RDQ Pebbleton, and this is Chalking Points, a show about language, grammar, and punctuation. Recently, I met a family of game makers, Grandpa Beck and company. They make wonderful games. And I was talking to Grandma Beck, and she asked me why it's incorrect to end a sentence with a preposition, words like to, from, about, in, and on. And I told her it's not incorrect. You were misinformed by a pedantic teacher, most likely, who didn't check his or her notes closely enough. I was only too happy to make a Chalking Points about this subject. This is one of those grammar myths that I'm just so tired of. Oops, I just did it. Let me try again. This is the kind of subject I can really sink my teeth into. Oh well. Here's the deal. The word preposition comes from the Latin prepositio, which means prefix, or putting one thing in front of another thing. In Latin, as far as I can comprehend, and I'm not a Latin scholar, so take this with the appropriate amount of salt, but in Latin, the preposition goes to the left of, that is, before, its object. Latin syntax is completely unlike English. Relations between parts of the sentence are determined by the endings on each of that sentence's words. Here's an example. You're familiar, I assume, with the idiom putting the cart before the horse, yes? Getting your priorities out of order? Well, in Latin, that can be rendered as carrum ante equum ponere, which is, in that rendering, cart before the horse to put. But because of the way Latin's case endings work, word order is basically irrelevant, or at the very least extremely flexible. You could say ponere ante equum carrum, ante equum ponere carrum, or pretty much any other combination so long as ante, the preposition, comes before equum, the horse. Because Latin has the ability to shift all its sentence components around like that, prepositions have to stay next to their objects, or there'd be no way to figure out their relation to the rest of the sentence. Now, that's Latin. English, as I've said before, is a Germanic language, but because of the Norman invasion in the year 1066, and the massive Latin-descended infusion of French that came along with it, Latin looms over English like a cantankerous stepdad. This brings us to the classical revival of the English Renaissance. The study of Latin, Greek, and to a lesser extent Hebrew was held up as being really important elements of a well-rounded person's education. With those languages in hand, you could study the Bible with great accuracy and read Greek and Roman philosophy texts as well as all the modern scientific texts written in Latin. It was the language of scholarship. So it's no surprise that English would start to get a bit of an inferiority complex. It was Robert Lowth, Bishop of London, who in 1762 wrote in his short introduction to English grammar that it was time to stop ending sentences with prepositions. It was improper for formal writing. He wrote, quote, "This is an idiom which our language is strongly inclined to. It prevails in common conversation, but the placing of the preposition before the relative is more graceful, and agrees much better with the solemn and elevated style." But, did you hear what I just heard? Quote, "This is an idiom which our language is strongly inclined to," end quote. Hey now, your grace, that's a little hypocritical. The bishop was one of the best educated men of his day, and what that means is that he harbored a bit of a prejudice in favor of Latin. Like other people of his time, he wanted English to more closely resemble the Latin he studied and so loved. But this preposition thing, it was never really a rule. Professor Mark Liberman of the eternally wonderful Language Log says that this nudge away from sentence-final prepositions began a century earlier with John Dryden, a famous English poet. But it wasn't until the 19th century that, he says, quote, "amateur peevologists," I love that, elevated this characteristic of the solemn and elevated style into a supposed grammatical rule, what Fowler's modern usage calls, quote, "a cherished superstition," end quote. At any rate, this rule has been floating around for a couple hundred years at this point, and I am only the latest language authority to level his disapproving blunderbuss at this creaky, unnecessary waste of grammatical effort. So what's the takeaway here? Don't feel bad about ending your sentences with prepositions. Do whatever sounds best and most natural. If it ends with a preposition, fine. If it doesn't, also fine. Don't bend a sentence out of shape just to avoid ending it with a preposition. That's just not what constructing sentences should be about. See what I did there? Huh? If you liked what you heard today, check out our website, lsrsgames.com, where you can learn about all kinds of linguistic oddities in our game, Smarticulation Language Edition 1. Check out Grandpa Beck's games, like Scheming and Skulking, and Cover Your Assets at their website, grandpabecksgames.com. That's all I've got for this week, so until next time, laugh, learn, light up your language. I'm RDQ Pebbleton, and I'll see you around. Post-plug bonus. A song about prepositions, y'all. Aw, yeah, I wish I were that cool. See you next week!